Black voters are flocking to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., according to a recent New York Times Siena College survey. It found RFK Jr. polling at 28% among black voters in battleground states, compared to 50% for Joe Biden and 13% for Donald Trump. That's in a three-way hypothetical matchup.
Left-leaning commentators of MSNBC's Morning Joe, Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, brushed off Biden's weakening grip on the black vote, writing off the current polls as merely a snapshot. Here's a clip from the morning show yesterday.
Let's talk about these polls that taken a year out from the election that I would say don't really mean anything on who's going to ultimately win. But if I were...
What are they, a snapshot into...
Snapshot of where people are right now. But if I were on the Biden campaign or any campaign that got these type of polls, I'd love them, because I would be using them to get everybody working from top to bottom.
Love it or not, Biden's camp is going to have to double their efforts to make up for lost ground with black voters who report being disillusioned with the president. Let's watch.
Now we have tax coming down to programs and different things that are going to be cut directly from our community to pay for illegals. All right, there's a problem with that. We're going to see a overwhelmingly amount of people that we have not seen in 30 years come out to vote. All right, people are being educated on the voter registration piece, how to change their party affiliation, question number 14 on their voter registration form, and people are walking away from the plantation of the Democratic Party once and for all.
So it's funny to hear Joe and Mika say, like, oh, yeah, it's a snapshot. Biden's camp must love these poll numbers because it's firing them up to work harder. I mean, the poll, fine, you can just say their poll numbers, whatever. They're very bad in the key battleground states that are going to decide the election. There's a lot of dissatisfaction within the Democratic Party on how Israel has been handled. And you hear from voters, including some minority voters, who are really not thrilled with the job Biden has done so far. So do you think it's as the landscape is as depressing as all that?
I think the landscape is depressing. Black voters and younger voters are the base of the Democratic Party. And Joe Biden's polling numbers right now are bad. There's no way to flip it, remix it, or turn it in any other way. But I do think being a year out of an election cycle points to a few things. One, polls a year out of an election, a national election, don't really tell us that much in general. They've been wrong in multiple elections in the past, up to and including probably, we saw it with Trump. We saw it with Biden in his first race. We saw it we've basically seen them be wrong consistently within every election a year out, with the exception of George Walker Bush's. But everyone else has been incorrect. And I think that there's something to be said about that. A lot can happen between now and next November. We didn't know 2 months ago that Israel was going to be fired on. Obviously, there are things that can happen within that time frame. But I think that for Joe Biden, one of the harshest things he has to come to grips with, one is the issue of Republican governors sending migrants to major cities in this country. New York being one, we've seen the backlash that the mayor there is getting. Chicago, my hometown, being one, we've seen the backlash the mayor is getting there as well. And a lot of it is coming from the black community, partially because where are migrants going to be housed? In many cases, they are housed within communities that are already not receiving the funds that they need to, historically divested communities that are already holding on by a thread, communities where their centers, their youth centers and other centers are being transported into migrant shelters, and it's pushing out black youth. There's a lot of frustration at the idea that budgets are being given towards a group that is not American, but also one that is not and has not paid taxes here. So I think that there's a lot of frustration there, be it right or wrong. We just recently saw a Cardi B video come out where she went live and basically castigated not only the president, but also the mayor of New York, and pretty much laid out what I think a lot of Americans, specifically black Americans, are feeling right now. And this administration has to work through those things, because I don't believe that there's going to be a large group of black people that are going to all of a sudden vote for RFK Jr. Nothing on the ground tells us that that's true. But what on the ground is true is that many black voters are thinking about sitting this
Staying
one out.
home.
And if they sit this election out, that's essentially voting for whomever the Republican nominee happens to be. And right now, it looks like it'll be Trump.
Yeah, we talked about the Cardi B video yesterday. Brianna and I did. Viewers should go look at that on our YouTube page if you haven't seen it. And she explicitly references exactly what you're describing, the services, the resources for the underprivileged community, for minority voters, those resources being transferred easily overseas, right? There's always more money to spend on Ukraine, on Israel, on foreign policy. Everywhere the money is found. But the perception among a lot of people is that our infrastructure is crumbling, that people are not being taken care of, that the economy is very bad and has been mismanaged. Inflation less of a problem now, but it was a problem, a year and a half ago, and could be again. Just this perception that the job of overseeing the country is not being done well by a president who is very old, is perceived to, you can't hide the fact that he seems very old. He's going to get older every year. I think that's really hurting him. And there's just a lot of frustration about all of that. Now, it is true at the same time that the Democratic Party has done well in the midterms. They did well in the election we just had. There's something enduring about Biden that maybe doesn't get captured in the poll numbers, or some of the attitudes about him you hear online and other places, or the Republicans have just not presented a very compelling alternative vision, or their own dysfunction.
I think it's a mix of both.
Seems that way, but Biden is vulnerable if Republicans...
And Republicans consistently running on abortion restrictions is just a gift to the Democratic Party.
Well, every now and then they detour from that to run on how they actually won the previous election, another really popular issue that people really want to hear a lot about. No, Republicans, I think people want to hear from Republicans on a lot of subjects, on our crime being pretty bad in a lot of places, including D.C., the school system's not serving people well. There was a lot of frustration about the COVID response, obviously, in a lot of blue places. That has faded a bit from memory, which is like thankfully, from a policy perspective, very eager to part ways with the blue city policies of the pandemic, but it's not serving Republicans well now because we have moved past. I think if we were in the midst of still having a battle over COVID stuff, honestly, I think Ron DeSantis would have be doing better even against Donald Trump, who the only time you can get his own audience to boo him is when it gets brought up that, well, he was the one who hired Dr. Fauci, and he was the one who shut down everything initially. He said he had no choice, but that's not popular among Republicans, and frankly, very popular among a lot of independent people, which is part of RFK Jr.'s support. But this three-way matchup will be fascinating because RFK Jr. is polling, above 20%, which is not. It's been a long time since we've had a case where someone outside the major two parties is doing that well, and it's going to be a totally different dynamic.
I question a lot of polls at this point, but I question this one specifically as it relates to black voters, because the most consistent and strongest polling of black voters has come from black polling organizations like Hit Strategies. Mm-hmm. When you look at Hit Strategies polling, he's not even on the radar of the majority of black voters in the primary states. And I think that makes a difference. In addition to, again, there are a lot of voters who are very frustrated with the system, very frustrated with the pandemic recovery, who, even though you can acknowledge the infrastructure development plan, the work that the president has done to decrease the cost of prescription drugs, particularly insulin for those who are on Medicare, these things matter. Mm-hmm. However, people's pocketbook issues also matter. They're watching crisis in their schools. They're watching rising housing costs. They're watching being pushed out of their communities. And I think that there's a level set of frustration that has to be understood by this administration. Also, that you can't take the black vote for granted, because if black people sit out, he's done. And I think he recognizes that. So these polls, be it, whether they are factual or not, and that kind of hinges on a lot of things, it does put a laser focus on him specifically with black voters and younger voters. Those are the voters who are going to make or break this election cycle. Republicans aren't worried about getting them because they never get them anyway. However, if they sit back, that is a win for Republicans regardless.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see. And we'll have more Rising right after this.